The results of the 4-day week pilot here in South Africa are in, and 92% of the companies that took part in this intend on continuing. 27 companies kicked off the 6-month 4-day work week trial, which began in March this year, and reported a range of business benefits from revenue increases and even improved productivity. The businesses that participated in the trial include tax and finance services, as well as marketing agencies, among others. So what else did the results actually reveal? Let's get more insights from Director of 4-Day Week South Africa NPC, that's Karen Lowe, who joins us via our video link from Cape Town this Wednesday. Lovely to have you on the program, Karen. Thanks very much indeed for making time. And I know the stakes are high, so I hope I asked the right questions. Let's begin by just ventilating the people who actually participated in this particular study, because I think that's kind of important to help us gauge perhaps some of the individual and particular differences that may exist. Who participated? And was there a particular reason why those were the participants for this pilot?
Good morning. Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to your viewers as well. Thank you so much for having me. An unexpected success story in South Africa is always very welcome to end the year off. So I'm very excited to be able to discuss the results with you today. So the profile of organizations that took part in the first Pioneer pilot are exactly the same sort of profile of organization that took part in the other global pilots in developed countries. So majority knowledge worker environments, as you pointed out, from professional services to marketing agency to tax and advisory services. So really in your services environment, and the majority of them small and medium enterprises. And you'll find that these types of organizations tend to be they have more visionary leadership, and they tend to be more agile and adaptive in their ability to plan and transition to a reduced hours working model. It's obviously a lot more complex for larger organizations. So, your early adopters, they always are those brave and courageous visionary leaders that sort of put their hand up and say, yes, we're excited, our staff well-being is front and center, and they're able to plan effectively and turn it on. So we are, though, in discussions with some larger organizations and blue-chip organizations, multinationals across the globe and in South Africa, looking to pilot within their own organizations. So we've worked with ASI Insurance in Germany, we've worked with Medibank in New Zealand and Australia, and I can't name the South African companies, unfortunately. This is the joy of the 4-day week. They either shout it from the rafters or rooftops, or they do not declare their involvement until the end of the pilot. But these large organizations, Ayanda, work with us in a sort of a bespoke consulting environment. You can't just switch to a 4-day week. You really have to plan, look at your risks, plan your case scenarios, and there's a big design process involved. You really do have to understand how you're going to redesign your entire work structure to ensure that you remain productivity positive and revenue positive. And it requires a lot of planning, a lot of change management, and your larger organizations tend to start in a smaller area and then scale and iterate and roll out across the department. So we are definitely looking next year in 2024 to fund some industry trials. So we'll start picking on, that's a terrible word to use, but I'm going to start picking on certain industry sectors that we would really like to see this work, where we've got a larger discrepancy between your highly skilled worker and your less skilled worker, where you've got front end and back end staff. So we're going to be going after the FMCG manufacturing sector, retail, banking, and indeed I would love to see some trials taking place within agriculture, mining, manufacturing industry, etc. So a lot more evidence to be gathered, but this first Pioneer pilot, I don't know about you, Ayanda, but South Africa can really surprise people.
Right.
I wasn't sure what these results were going to look like at all. I have no hand in the research at all. It was completely external with Stellenbosch Business School and Boston College in the US. So I was eagerly awaiting the results, just like everybody else. And indeed, we've shown very, very similar results to global pilots. And for a developing country with our magnitude of socioeconomic issues that we deal with on a daily basis, I really am proud of these 28 companies that have managed to successfully do the pilot.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've described it as an unexpected success. I was hoping that the list of industries you're going to target next is broadcasting included there, but
absolutely, Ayanda. We need to look at the media industry. It's possible. It's possible.
Yeah, we'll still be here to let people know how the study went at the very least. But I'm interested to go into the detail, right? Because the naysayers among us were really worried about the bottom line, and that's probably the case for even the people who are in charge of these businesses. But you saw two things unfold. One, there was an increase in revenue, there was an increase in productivity, and more importantly, arguably, there was an increase in the well-being of some of these employees. Take us through some of what that actually looks like.
So I think, Ayanda, what you've got here is both a business case and an employee case. And I think this is what is so special about reduced hours working within the context of the 4-day week. So productivity went up 49%. So reported productivity across the board. And what's important to note about the productivity, which is obviously your outputs, were maintained or improved. So in this instance, improved. There was a 39% of the sample reported no change to the intensity of the work. So in other words, they weren't trying to work more hours in the 4 days that they were actually at work. And in fact, 25% of our sample reported a decrease in the intensity of work. So this really is a marker of efficiencies. So the productivity score is incredibly positive. And then rightly so, you pointed out the revenue growth, which if you took the 6 months period of the trial compared to the previous 6 months of the 2022 financial year, we saw an average revenue growth of 10.5% reported across the pilot participants. So this is what we would call a productivity positive and revenue positive environment. If you extend that business case a little bit further, and we can speak from an employer perspective and a C-suite and a board perspective, if you cast your eye to what is stressing the organization out, there is a lot of cost being incurred in trying to improve well-being. You can understand how many organizations, big and small, are concerned about absenteeism rates, staff attrition rates, in other words, people leaving, presenteeism, where staff are there but not really there because they're just not at their capacity. So if you start seeing reductions in absenteeism like we did, which was an average of 9%, a reduction in resignations of 11%. And then you start layering on the well-being gains, where we saw 35% reported improvements in mental health. We saw exercise being banked, 35% more exercise. Now, that might be a 5-minute walk for somebody, but a 35% improvement in that is pointing to overall well-being. Exercise, sleep, and we all know what happens with sleep deprivation, so banking more sleep. And then I think the other softer metrics on work-life balance, up 47%. Satisfaction with time that I have for myself and my personal life and my family, up 59%. So under the best way I can explain this is the business will seek to save costs on their talent management, on keeping good staff in play, reducing the costs of absenteeism, which obviously has a negative and adverse effect on outputs. So if you've got happier, healthy, engaged staff, they're loyal, they're doing their job, they're doing their very best when they're at work. But on the other hand, you've got an employee that is feeling incredibly valued. They're feeling trusted because there is a big degree of autonomy that comes into the play here. I am trusted to work when I'm at work, and I'm trusted to take more deliberate and intentional rest when I am off work. So what you're doing is you're unlocking capacity, and you're also unlocking it in a way that an individual, so for me as a working mom, I can take time off in a way that makes sense to me, to be more present for my children, to see my parents a little bit more often, to start a side hustle, or actually just, quite frankly, to take more me time or downtime, which we saw was very prevalent. So the ecosystem is at the heart of productivity experiments. So you've got this 180, 100, 100% pay and leave, 80% of the average work week in return for 100% productivity. And that creates the win-win, because it's a productivity play, but it's taken at an individual level and planned as a team so that it makes sense to the organization specific. And I suppose before I stop talking completely, it's important to know that every organization really does do this very, very differently, depending on their industry, the types of clients that they serve, and obviously the type of staff complement and the size of the organization come into play as well.
Fascinating, especially because because, of course, things like employee well-being are so subjective and in some instances so elusive. But we're also at that time of the year where people are starting to ask questions around whether they feel tired or burnt out. And I wonder whether we've been able to measure this in this particular study, you know, the extent to which people have been able to stave off that feeling, whatever it is, because of the compounded impact of going through the year, quite frankly, given the pressures that many people face at work.
And it's been an exhausting year, and I don't think anyone has been exempt from that. And there's not one boardroom that I go into where the word burnout does not come into play. And within the context of this study, burnout dropped by 57%. So employees that were taking part in the study reported less fatigue of 36%, and they were feeling less burnt out. So nearly 60% of the sample reporting that they have an improvement in what we call work ability. In other words, I am more rested, I'm more capable of doing better task management, I'm managing my workload better, I'm feeling more creative, and I'm feeling more balanced. I really am able to juggle the mental load. And I think burnout is this prolonged stress cycle that we experience, and it piles on in South Africa, make no mistake, but none of us are exempt from it. So having a study that reports employees feeling less burnt out, whilst it's subjective, it is definitely experienced at an individual level. There are so many physiological symptoms. And I think if employees are reporting reduced burnout, what it means is they're saying my capacity to work, my levels of fatigue have dropped. And therefore I'm more present and I'm more able to do my work. And we've seen this in 12-month, 24-month data coming out of the more developed countries. This sustains over a longer period of time. So what you're doing is you're taking a struggling threshold into a striving or a flourishing threshold. And this is what a lot of the 4-day-week organizations would reflect on when they look back, and hopefully ours will too when we take another read in 6 months' time. How has this sustained itself? And if we can sustain lower levels of burnout, we can reduce absenteeism, resignations, and we can continue to see reported time satisfaction and workability, then we have the recipe for a sustainable reduced hour model for that company, and indeed we can bank on this working over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
Be a healthier workforce.
Absolutely. The risk, of course, since we're really sort of, I don't want to use the word gushing over this particular pilot, but the risk we run is creating the impression that 4-day weeks are the panacea to all work-related issues. And I don't think that's what we're saying either this morning, is it? There is still a lot of work that managers, for instance, need to do in order to make sure that their employees are happy and, of course, that they're meeting whatever targets they set for themselves, even if they do adopt this 4-day week structure.
Absolutely, it's a very complex undertaking, and certainly, as I said before, it's not something you switch on, it's something you transition to. But I always say the 4-day week does not solve your issues, it surfaces them. So in your planning and preparation and really getting ready to trial, it's about co-creating and redesigning the work week with the staff. So this is not a top-down approach. It's a bottom-up approach. And you can imagine how uncomfortable some leaders actually feel about this. I'm handing over the reins to staff to tell me how they can unlock 8 hours a week in an average work week to take for themselves. So it's not all a bed of roses. It is hard. There's a lot of change management. It requires a lot of communication. You need change champions, as I call them. You do need organizations in the organization that are disseminating reports. And because you're in an experiment, you're problem solving. And we always say to our companies that are involved in this journey, it's important to fail and fail fast and iterate and optimize. So even through the trial period, no matter how well you've planned, you are still going to need to analyze what is going on. And 1 month can throw you completely. For example, in my industry, in the marketing communications industry, I don't know if you remember, but April, in the first week of May, gave us 5 consecutive 4-day weeks as a result of all of our bank holidays. Now, that's in a very intense period of work for comstrat or communication strategy development in the agency environment. So now you have a reduced work week, you've got 5 consecutive weeks, and you've got a natural seasonal increase in intensity of work. And then it is up to those organizations to understand where those periods of intensity are likely to impact them. So for example, in tax, you've got tax cycles where you can't possibly have staff off. You have to continue to produce the output. And this is where you start getting creative with the solution. So it's not necessarily a Friday off. And in fact, the South African companies were least prevalent in terms of choosing Friday or Monday as a day off. So you've got 47% of a global sample choosing a 5th day off, a 5th day stoppage, so Friday. Whereas only 2% of the South African sample opted for a Friday off. And we started seeing much more creative and a gradual move towards that reduced work week coming through in 2 half days, time off every day. And that was very prevalent for our working moms and our working sample, which was actually 70% of this pilot sample, saying that going in later, coming home earlier, or 2 half days, or perhaps a Wednesday, or even staggering teams. So when you ask about challenges, it is a challenge because it requires continual experimentation, a continual state of problem solving. It requires bottom up and a leader to allow the employees to guide themselves through the journey. And it really is about accountability. So, you have to have red lines in place that says, if this happens, the organization has the right to suspend or pause the trial because it's a red line. If my productivity drops or my revenue drops or I'm not manufacturing to the same speed, or on the other hand, if my market conditions change, what if I lose a client? What if I lose a piece of operation machinery that is critical? What if we have a taxi strike? Whatever is going on within the market environment, revenue loss, etc., organizations will then have the right to say, let's pause this temporarily and let's plan to continue to be successful. And this is what experimentation does. It just really allows you to innovate, be creative, look through a different lens of, if there's a problem, how do we solve it?
Yeah.
And it's not all a bed of roses, Ayanda. It really isn't. But it requires a more coaching style of leadership, visionary leadership, and it definitely requires you to place an enormous amount of trust in your staff.
Absolutely. Not the answer to all your problems, but certainly an exciting prospect given what's come out of the study. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Karen. It's been lovely engaging you on these different findings. Karen Lowe is the director of 4-Day Week South Africa NPC, joining us there for the results finally of this pilot here in South Africa.